Arlen Schumer. I'm a comic book artist and a comic book historian, lover of American pop culture, and welcome to my home. There's an entire history of Batman just in these figures that I've assembled. You have the Batman model kit from 1964. Here's the Batman of the animated series from the early 90s. Here's Robin first introduced, more than ink. And then in the 1970s, that's what he looked like then. So the things in my apartment also show the history of how these characters developed over time. I've been drawing since I was 3 years old, and then in summer camp, and when I was 5 or 6, I was turned on to comic books, started reading in bunks. Along with the Archies and Bettys and Veronicas, they were superheroes. And started drawing from looking at the comics and reading the comics, and they really taught me really everything I know about art. Even though I went to a great art school and studied with great artists, what we're going to do is the actual nuts and bolts, old-fashioned, old-school 20th century drawing. It's a little bit of magic. Okay, with this drawing of Iron Man, I took my pencil drawing and I scanned it into the computer and I printed it out, but in reverse of the way I penciled it. So that now I'm going to flip it over on the light table, and now on this side of the paper I'm going to ink it with black line and make those decisions of what to ink and how thick the line should be and where you should commit to black. Okay, so there's the logo for the show. I scanned this ink drawing in, and that's how we got this drawing here. And you can see as I pull off these different layers, you can see all the different characters that I have here. There's your Batman in the background, Iron Man, Ares. My photo reference for him, picture of Brad Pitt from the movie. The shield is from another source, and the sword is from the third source. My Hercules is basically, I use Arnold Schwarzenegger. We have Zeus, which I based on the classic Zeus from Fantasia, the Walt Disney film. And that's basically how I'm going to create this composited image. I have a lot of work cut out for me. I have to finish inking these drawings and scan them in and color them. But thanks for coming. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I'll see you in the funny pages.
There is the finished color image for a show on ABC's 2020 about a year ago, June of 2010, Superhumans, in which these individuals were real people that are doing sort of superhuman athletic feats. So they contacted me about turning them into superheroes while keeping their photographic look contrasted with the mythical superheroes. And this is the type of artwork that I do as an illustrator doing comic book art for advertising. So welcome everybody to my comic book life. Now, any discussion of comics, hey kids, comics. What are comics? Comics are this great American indigenous art form, like baseball, like jazz, like musical comedy is an indigenous American art form. But when you're talking about comics, words and pictures, to tell a story, how far back do you want to go? You can go back to the cave paintings, sequential images to tell a story. A couple of 100,000 years later, you get sequential images in Egyptian hieroglyphics, with cuneiforms being the text. A couple of more 100 or 1,000 years pass, you have in medieval times, you begin to see what are called broadsides in Europe, sequential images to tell a story, whether it's something real that happened or something mythical. A couple of more 100 years pass, and these broadsides begin to develop the text that goes along with them. Then it comes to America. This is the work of Rudolf Toffler. Then in the late 19th century, at the dawn of the 20th century, the first American comic strip, The Yellow Kid, makes its appearance in the New York Journal. And this is, if you've heard the term yellow journalism. Hearst and Pulitzer were ripping each other off and hiring each other's staffs because the Yellow Kid, who was supposed to be a kind of a numb immigrant telling stories and expressions, and you begin to see word balloons and the sequential images. A year later, Outcalled, who did the Yellow Kid, gets hired, I think, by Hearst to go to his paper, and you begin to see the Yellow Kid developing these strict panels that comic strips in the 20th century began to be part of. Little Nemo in Slumberland by Winsor McCay, one of the greatest artists of all time, also the creator of the animated film before Disney, did a famous comic strip in the early 20th century, Little Nemo in Slumberland, that starts out with a kid sleeping and dreaming, and McKay's imagination and what he did with the Sunday comic strip page has really never been equaled, and he showed the way that comics can go for imagination. Here's another Little Nemo. Look at the contrast between the urban architecture on top with the fantasy worlds. And that's the thing about comics, they created worlds. Look at the Sunday comic strip by Crazy Cat. You can enjoy this image on so many levels. You don't even have to know what Crazy Cat's about. On a pure graphic level, comic artists started to experiment with the very page itself as an artistic medium. Later on, in the 1930s, you had strips like Gasoline Alley taking place in the suburbs. But look how the artist divides up the page in both space and time, so you're reading it left to right, top to bottom, but seeing entire image. Then what happens in comic strips in the late 20s and 30s? The adventure strips take over. Dick Tracy being the most prominent. And you begin to see Chester Gould as an artist and almost as a graphic designer. Very diagrammatic panels, even his lettering has an identity. And then we enter the 1930s, the golden age of the Sunday illustrated comic strip, where they were printed. The reason why I show you this image is that comic strips in the Sundays were printed like this big. You know what? I'm going to say almost actual size to the screen. But Prince Valiant was maybe the epitome of the illustrated comic strip. Then, of course, you have the hero of Tarzan, the adventure strip taking place in the jungle. Tarzan was a model for the future Superman. Tarzan in outer space comes later in the guise of Flash Gordon, the initial science fiction comic strip. Because you can see the jungles of Tarzan are there, but the science fiction that Alex Raymond, the creator, brought. And when we look at Alex Raymond's Flash Gordon, we begin to see the primary color motifs that Young, Siegel, and Schuster later co-opted for their creation of Superman in 1938. With Superman came the advent of the comic book. So superheroes and comic books were always inextricably linked. The success of the superhero with basically taking comic strips, folding them up and printing them as comic books is how it started. Interesting that what made Superman unique is that shield on his chest, which some would say were taken from a police shield. But the fact that the first Superman, he's in a shield, and a couple of years later, in 1943, maybe the most significant Superman image tying the superhero with America is this classic image that forever united the superhero as being an American ideal and a carrier of American thoughts and ideas. Exactly 20 years later, Superman celebrates his 25th year anniversary, the silver anniversary, 1963. I happen to be in summer camp. I'm 5 years old. That comic book at my feet is that Superman annual. That might be the first superhero or comic book image I can remember. Now, I'm in camp, and I decide to send my mother a letter. And it was actually a series of 8.5 by 11 sheets. Dear Mom, this is a story that I made, and I hope you like it. All my love and kiss, only one kiss, Arlen. Now, this is my story. Who is this deep sea character? A children's show, Diver Dan, black and white. Looking like he was underwater, he walked slowly, the fish were hanging by thin wires. It was a kid's show. But you never saw Diver Dan's face. So in a way, he was sort of like a superhero. And my brother, who was older than me, like you two, he started drawing Diver Dan off the TV set. So younger brother does what older brother does. I start drawing Diver Dan. So, like I said, I'm 5.5 years old here. There's Diver Dan. It was a sequence of 8.5 by 11 pages. The undersea wreck. I could never draw fish to this day. Of course, he meets the giant octopus. Now, anybody that saw 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the great Disney film, that's still the greatest octopus battle. I must have gotten it from there. But here's what I like about this next image. Okay, of course, he stabs him with a spear gun. The violence starts early. But here's what I like, the comic book thing. He stabs him with his knife, but then there's the circular inset panel showing you the close-up. I had to get that from comics. Here's a postcard I sent to my mother. Kids were writing, "Dear Mom, send candy." I wrote, "Look, Superman." Now I think I got this image from the Superman Aurora model. You kids are lucky. You go to comic book stores, there's statues, figurines, this, that, and the other thing. When we were kids, we had nothing. God bless Aurora, they started to make superhero models. My brother and I must have made about 100 of these because they were so cheap. You make it, you screw it up, you blow it up with firecrackers, you start again. 1966, I'm 8 years old. In my garden apartment, my mother was a widow raising my brother and I. She gave us the bedroom, she took the convertible couch, sacrifice. And there's the Ethan Allen early American decor clashing with our American pop culture. There's the 1966 Flash comic I was reading. We are going to come back to that comic in a little while. My brother, of course, was the Marvel Comics fan. So he was a big fan in the mid to late 60s of the Fantastic Four. And one of the first great fan magazines came out in 1969-70, Marvel Mania. And there's the contents page, and I always liked the word Marvel Mania on the left side there with the characters' pictures inside. Again, remember this image, we're going to come back to it. You open up a couple pages later, what's that image on the right? What is that? That's the golden, done by, you can always tell a young artist by the amateurish signature, but there's my signature. 12 years old, my first published art. If you sent in art to Marvel Mania, maybe they would publish it. Now, why I would draw, don't ask me, I was a Superman Batman fan. I wasn't a big Marvel fan. Why I chose the golden age, not the golden age, the original Iron Man, which your generation, seeing the movies, they paid homage to in the very first Iron Man movie. That is what we call the bulky gray Iron Man. But that is my first published art. It appeared in Marvel Mania 6. Now, this pencil cover, it's a little bit hard to distinguish. That is a pencil illustration that was, I think, never used by one of the masters of comic book art, Neil Adams. The reason why Neil Adams is significant on so many levels in my comic book life is that he had to follow the Batman TV show, which, because of the success, the comic book actually imitated the TV show. And the TV show, we all have a love-hate relationship. It was goofy. It made fun of the character. Neil Adams, in 1 year, reversed the paradigm and brought Batman back from that to this. And how did he do that? He did like any artist with integrity. He went back to the source. He went back to 1939 and saw the mysterious Batman. And that's why he, in a sense, what they call now retrofitting. Neil Adams was a postmodern comic book creator. He didn't invent Batman, he reinvented Batman. He went back to the classic images, but he updated them in his photorealistic style. So the stiff Batman cape, which looks like Stiff Wings by Bob Kane in 1939, in the hands of Neil Adams in 1968, the same month that the TV show comes off the air, Neil Adams does this issue of Batman, teamed up with a character, Deadman, who's a whole nother lecture, and changes history overnight. And that's why you have the Dark Knight of today. If Neil Adams hadn't done images like this, you would not have the Dark Knight of today. And it was images like this that influenced me in the same year, 1970, to do my own multi-page origin of Batman. But I kept my love of Batman all through my teenage years to the point where by the time I was in high school, Fair Lawn High, February 1976, I became the art director of Batmania, the fan magazine of Batman. So you can see just how my drawing improved in those 6 years from 12 years old to 18. Then I go to Rhode Island School of Design. Why? Because a great comic book artist, you've heard of him, Walt Simonson, graduated from there. And I was like, holy crap, if they could turn out a guy like Simonson, I'm going to go to Rhode Island School of Design. When I got there in Providence, I ended up majoring in graphic design, which was verbal visual communication. It appealed to me because comics were verbal and visual. I liked advertising. Well, when it came time to get our graduation pictures for the yearbook, they always gave it to a graphic designer. And the graphic designer in charge said to everybody, I'm going to shoot black and white from your knees to your head. You can come dressed as anything you want. Here was my graduation yearbook photo, which I'm sure alumni to this day look back at this picture and go, who the hell was that? I wanted to turn myself into a black and white comic character, so I chose an angle and I painted the black line. My degree project was an outgrowth of that, where I actually turned myself into a superhero. I called it The Strange Adventure of Arthur Specter. It was kind of like a photo comic. This is the year 1979-80. One of my all-time favorite surrealist covers, The Hand from Beyond, one of the DC Wash covers, but I love that image. And like I said, this is a double-page spread. It's sort of a photo comic, and it's a little autobiographical, kind of like today, about my journey from a kid who loved comics to now, you know, a college student, major graphic design, but still loving comics and trying to integrate comics with graphic design. So in the course of this weird little story, I become that flat graphic character. I meet the bad guys, and of course, you know, they attack me. And what I tried to do with this was get across the dynamics with photography of that whole Batman TV show with a pow with a tilted angle. Anyway, I get knocked out and I land on my Superman shirt, and it somehow revives me with its power, and I become the Art Specter. My initials, of course. Anyway, as the guys come at me, I cast my shadow, and it becomes the image captor, which was my portfolio, of course. I zap the guy into a dot screen and get him down in my book, and the other guy goes, ah! And then I get them both trapped in my portfolio, and then I'm off to Future City, which in real life I end up going to New York City to make my livelihood. And that's how my college career ends in 1980. 5 years later, the group Aha comes out with that song, Take On Me. What is the video about? A guy going into a black and white comic world. And she's real, and she becomes a comic. If anybody's ever seen this, I was only 5 years ahead of my time, I'd like to think. One of my first jobs in New York City, I ended up doing the graphics for the David Letterman show, the first year the show was on the air. I would be given images from New York City, and I had to work in the type to make it look like it was actually there. So believe it or not, I got that lettering design from the Shazam comic book. I ended up getting back connected with Neil Adams, my childhood idol. I ended up working for his commercial art studio. By that time, he looked more like this, and he ran a commercial art studio in Manhattan that's not me, by the way, that's a professional named Carl Gafford. But Neil Adams ran a commercial art studio that did comics for advertising. He started out his career years before working for an agency in New York City named Johnstone & Cushing, which only did comics for advertising. Then he went off on his own as a freelancer, but continued to do, like you see, storyboards, which are like comics. Then he did, in the late 60s and early 70s, he did comics for advertising. And he would create superheroes like that, Capital Tape Man. When I left his agency called Continuity in 1986, I knew I could not compete with my childhood idol when it came to drawing. He's Neil Adams, the master. I learned how to draw from him. But I figured with my graphic design background and my love of type, maybe I could do comics for advertising that was not better than Neil's, but different than Neil's. So one of the first visible campaigns I did in 1990, these were on the backs of comic books themselves, was this Three Musketeers candy bar campaign. And I'm going to show you my approach. This was based on land, like an Indiana Jones type idea, and this was based in outer space. But here's the thing, I want to show you what I like to think separates me from your typical commercial illustrator. This is what I was given by the art director at the ad agency. Now some illustrators will take that and literally just put it on a light box and make it better. They'll draw over it. But here's the thing. If you actually examine what the guy's saying, hey Bob, what could they possibly be building up there that needs 3,000 tons of chocolate? Bob's eyes widen in shock as something shocking in outer space. Now, if you know anything about comics, they're words and pictures. The words should not be telling you what the picture is. If you're a comic artist, you should be able to draw Bob's eyes widening in shock. So if you look at my first sketch, and you look in close to my 2 panels, it's a very subtle thing, but look how I broke it up. What could they possibly be building out there that needs 3,000 tons of ... Because remember, I didn't write the script, the agency gave me this. Chocolate? And his eyes are widened in shot. Once the pencil sketch is approved, I do what's called a tight pencil on a light box. I tighten up the details. Then I put that on a light box and ink it in black line. And you can see I leave room for color. And then I scan it in and color it on the computer. Here's another one in the series taking place in the ocean. Now even look at the title I used, the word adventure. I didn't just make up that typeface. As a graphic designer, again, I was taught you go to the source. The original comic book logotypes, they're called, were beautiful as type. The same graphic designer that did Adventure Comics, did Action Comics, and all of the great DC logos. I do a whole nother lecture on them. But when I did the cover for Art Direction magazine, a trade magazine of the field in 1987, again, if the title is beginning with the letter A, I'm going to use that typeface. So part of my career is also trying to get comic book art elevated in the commercial art place as great art. Roy Lichtenstein took comics and brought them into the fine art world in order to gain respect for the form. I wanted to bring them into places in the commercial art world that may not be aware of comics but should be. So I convinced Print Magazine in 1988, which is the trade magazine of the graphic design field, to commit to a special issue on comics. And I designed the cover and wrote one of the lead articles. Can you see the letters C-O-M-I-C-S? You see why I chose red, yellow, and blue? 6 panels to a page is the classic comic book page. The same year, Print Magazine had a backup feature in every issue called the design scene, in which they asked the designer to make a comment on whatever you interpret the design scene as. So here's what I did. That Superman is a bagman in Times Square, saying to the people who are not listening, comic books are books. Comic books are art. Comic books are graphic design. Why won't you listen to me? Well, 20-something years later, I actually got to finally lecture out in Los Angeles last fall, and I kept that same window pane design on the graphic design of comic book art, which is a real personal victory for me to actually lecture to a design class. And if all goes well, I'll be going out in September to lecture to the American Institute of Graphic Arts, the AIGA, a very prestigious organization, on this subject. And like I said, I've done talks over the years, great comic book typography. All those DC logos were hand-lettered by this letterer named Ira Schnapp, who designed the Superman logo, every great DC logo you've ever thought of. And everything I do, whenever I do lettering, is an homage to Ira Schnapp. When I did, also for Print Magazine, a feature about hand-drawn art versus the computer, I based graphic designer comics on the Detective Comics logo. And all of my lettering is, you know, WWID. What would Ira Schnapp do is my motto. So in this story, I've got a kind of a wrestling match between Computerror and Artman, who represents hand-drawn art. So of course they battle, and he says, for art and the artist who created. And Computerror says, for technology and the artist it replaces. And that's what all artists of my sort of peer group have been facing these last 20 years, is how to merge the hand-drawn black line, which is what I do, with all the benefits that computer coloring could do. So, speaking of the computer, when I did a cover for Wired magazine, the trade magazine of the computer industry, my subject matter, the superhero, is classic looking, but the effects, the blurriness of the background, the lighting effects, the glistens, that's what computer graphics can bring. So I try to find a happy medium. Now, I am a shameless rip-off artist of the great artists who inspired me. So I tried to pay homage to this classic Neil Adams Superman, not trace it or copy it, but get the spirit of it. And over time, I've actually gotten to do Superman and the superheroes. This was for Time magazine a couple of years ago. This was when they did a summer movie announcement, so I got to do the superheroes for real. For Rolling Stone magazine a couple years ago, when the Iron Man movie, the Indiana Jones, and Batman were all facing off, the second I heard that I had to have three heroes facing each other, I try to base my images on classic comic covers. So this was the image I always thought of, with two characters facing off, you can see in my pencil sketch, against the third. There's the type pencil. And nowadays, because the computer, you see why the faces are missing? Because if you look at the ink version, I can ink the faces bigger, scan them in, shrink them down, and they look even better. And there's the final color art. For Entertainment Weekly, when there was talk of a Batman, Superman, kind of world's finest movie, I did that image. Years ago, when the second Batman movie came out, the third Batman movie, they wanted Entertainment Weekly, a picture of Batman watching his videos. What did I base that image on? I had to base it on that image. Recently, for the cover of Washington Post magazine, about a real-life black comic artist who's blind, and he's got his friend, also a comic artist, to actually do the drawing for him. So when they told me they're like a dynamic duo, I said, dynamic duo, hello? That's the classic dynamic duo image. There's my pencil sketch. And again, all my lettering on the left, Irish snap. I always do little gentle spoofs or parodies, but of course, DC Comics in 1989, when this came out, I got a letter from Paul Levitz, the president at the time. He goes, "You've cleverly positioned his towel to read like a cape." To which I responded, that's why it's a parody and a satire, because it's not a cape, it's a towel. Then for Adweek magazine the same year, I was told, Arlen, the TV networks have to become super heroic to face off against cable. Well, as soon as I heard that, I said, are you kidding me? The mild-mannered networks have to become super salesmen. Why would I turn Andy Warhol into Superman and call it super fraud? Because that very same year, 1989, 2 years after he died, I found fraudulent images in the Andy Warhol collection that had to do with Superman. Now, when I say Andy Warhol to you, everybody usually thinks of the soup cans and all the repetitive silkscreen imagery. Well, unless you're a real comic fan or a real Warhol fan, he started out in the early 60s, before the cans, and was making actual giant paintings blown up of comic panels that he sort of repainted. That's a Kurt Schaffenberger Superman, if you know Kurt Schaffenberger. Here's a Batman that Warhol did. Then he did a Popeye. But then in 1961 or 62, his manager brings him over to the studio of a young artist named Roy Lichtenstein, who was also doing comic strip imagery, not quite yet with the big dots he was later be known for. The minute Warhol saw what Lichtenstein was doing, he said, forget the comics, I'm going to leave them to Roy. That's when he went into the soup cans. But he always maintained his love of Superman, and somewhere in the mid-80s, a couple years before he died, he created this silkscreen image to just show that he still loves Superman. Well, 2 years after he dies, I get the Museum of Modern Art catalog after the big show, the catalog raisonné, whatever it's called, and I open it up, and I find these images on a double-page spread. If you notice, they're actually about 8.5 by 11, and these are not paintings of comic panels. Those are actual collages, cut-up comic panels, pasted on a canvas, splattered with what looks like watercolor dye, and signed Andy Warhol 1961. Well, there's one problem with this image. When I looked at it, I was reading Superman in the 60s. I recognized those panels. They came from a 1967 comic book. So I ask you, how could collages dated 1961 use panels from 1967? If you know your Warhol history, you'll know that he had his mother signing his artwork. A friend of mine who's a comic book fan contacted me like the next day. He goes, Arlen, have you seen the Warhol book? And I knew exactly what he was talking about. I said, yeah, there's frauds in there. So his sister worked for the San Francisco Chronicle and wrote this story. I tried to publicize the story in the New York area by creating this image. The bottom line is, not one New York media outlet wanted to touch the story. Why? Maybe the Warhol on their wall is a fraud. Years later, vindication, it turns out I was right. First of all, the gallery owner of those images had them removed from the traveling exhibition, but if you get that MoMA catalog, those frauds are still in there. It turns out I was right. It was recently discovered that one of his underlings, trying to make money, decided to make these fraudulent collages. The reason why he dated them 61 is because they would be worth more if they were done in his seminal comic era. But what it really shows from a comic historian's point of view is the very contempt and disregard for the medium itself. That fraud was cutting out those panels going, nobody's going to know the difference between a 1967 Superman and 1961. And sure enough, the gallery didn't recognize it, the Museum of Modern Art didn't recognize it, and those frauds are still in there. So those of us who love comic history and are working in the field, it is our duty and responsibility, all of us, to uplift the medium, to gain it the respect that it deserves. Now, at the same time, as a commercial artist, I'm using that Clark Kent image for commercial reasons. I must have used this image, God bless it, for multiple usages. This was a magazine cover for some economy magazine, to the point where I even show clients, put your logo here and I'll make you your own image. Well, I don't know if it's ever on Facebook, we were supposed to have these beautiful cards printed, but for this very show, I created, using that classic Clark Kent motif, the Superheroes for Houses logo. When I met Spiro a couple months ago at a Batman TV show convention, I looked at his logo, I said, Spiro, I think I can give you a better logo. So here's my first sketch. And what I was working for, if you look at the image behind the hero, the way I came up with that, I took the Superman symbol and I inverted it. Because it started to look like a little house to me, because I thought about hospice and the letter H, and that's how I was able to come up. I wanted that sort of superhero chest symbol. So there's my tight pencil. I just added the gray tone sometimes when I show this to the people I'm working with, so it separates a little more. But notice how I worked in the word for to the superhero. So he's four-man. Get it? I'm four-man and I'm a four, whatever. So there's the ink, where you can see I tighten things up a little bit. And there's the color and how it works on the chest. Then I came up with the type phrase, don't be mild-mannered, be a superhero for hospice. And here's how it worked for the specific day, because Spiro's going to do more shows like this. And then this was supposed to be, we were supposed to have the cards today, an 8.5 by 5.5 inch card. This was the back. So again, as an art director, graphic designer, I try to do good comics, but still keep the fun. And I've done superheroes with cards before. This is what happens when you ask a nice Jewish boy to come up with a Christmas card. You get a Santa Claus that's working out, kicking butt, and taking names. I also was lucky enough to actually do three-dimensional pop-up greeting cards for this company Pop Shots back in 1993. I did a series of DC cards, and I drew them flat, and then they were, designed to fold and be these like pop-up images. So I got to do sort of a combination Kurt Swan, Joe Shuster image. I got to do a Batman card based on my favorite, the Batman animated series. For the Marvel cards, I did X-Men and Spider-Man. Now, whenever I do Spider-Man, I always go back to the original, the Steve Ditko. First, there are some of us who only think there are 38 issues of Spider-Man. Once Ditko left, it was like Mel Blanc voicing Bugs Bunny. So when I had to do a character called a Websider for a graphic design studio, I did a kind of updated version. Let me show you that again. More of a high-tech, but I kept that Ditko flavor. For Entertainment Weekly, when Seinfeld went off the air, they said, Arlen, we want you to turn them into the Fantastic Four. So you can see how I kind of broke up the characters, but what was I thinking of in my mind? That classic Jack Kirby Fantastic Four with the outer space and the Kirby crackle. Now when we're talking Jack Kirby, his most beloved character is of course Captain America that he co-created with Joe Simon. Often I've been asked as a commercial artist, can you give me a Captain America type? So for IBM, Captain Info. This is a Jack Kirby early 1940s World War II image. When I did my own Jewish superhero based on Captain America called Captain Israel, I tried to base it on every Kirby World War II character I could find. I think this is probably the first pro-Israel army image I think ever created. But you know, that plus 350 gets me a latte at Starbucks. But there's the first issue. I did 2 issues of Captain Israel, which I can show you downstairs after the show, with a pro-Israel organization in Los Angeles. But my idea was, Captain America was created in the 1940s, before we went into the war, to elevate our consciousness, which was isolationist, to pay attention to what was happening in Europe. They used to dress up actors as Captain America and stump for war bonds. So that was my vision for Captain Israel. And everything I do, I kind of develop a lecture or presentation about. So last summer at the San Diego Comic Convention, I developed a lecture showing the Jewish roots of the superhero, which goes back as far as you want. If you know the Golem myth, which is the basis for the Frankenstein myth, creating a hero to save the Jews from the pogroms in the ghetto. The need for a hero. You can go back to Jesus Christ himself. We needed a hero that was created by a Jewish sensibility. For Jor-El so loved the earth, he gave his only begotten son with powers and abilities far beyond those of mortal men. Hello? I'm a big Bruce Springsteen fan, the art director of his first fan magazine. 10-year anniversary of that magazine. I turned them into the superhero of rock and roll, Captain America. I've done other musicians, both black and white, with dots or without, for the Village Voice, turning Serena Williams into super tennis players. The first Super Bowl 4 years ago, wraparound cover for the New York Post, turning Brady into kind of an evil Doctor Strange, and Eli Manning as the heroic giant. This was a double-page spread for a trade magazine, for the online advertising industry. Each one of these people I turned into, you can still see the photograph resemblance. They had a luncheon to celebrate the issue, and I got to meet all the people with blow-ups of the images for them to sign. And then on my own, I said, you're going to have screens there. I worked with a Flash animation designer, and I took that double-page spread image, and I came up with this that I narrated, wrote, and I know the sound is bad, but you get the gist. All the lettering's by hand. Martial law.
Tommy Newlands creates worlds for people to immerse themselves in, carving out niches and surfing swells, as the interactive Renaissance Superman known as the Shadow of the Board. See those sour things, weaves a wondrous web of business and personal relationships in a not-so-secret identity as the worldwide web slinger Ms. Webb. Want to see the lady of big ideas like a mythic Norse god, the uncanny...
Everybody loves getting turned into a superhero, and they love it.
Great day! Bob Pearson fights off human antibodies to save the world from bad media plotting as a mother! Babs Magada cleans up online marketing with a crowd in the target community.
I don't know if you can tell, that's the Superman TV show theme in the background. I know the sound is there.
As he dives into the unknown, uncharted areas of the digital media realm as Captain Contextual. And like the superheroes of America's pop culture past, these non-superpower professionals of media mastery have come together as the awesome, the omnipotent, online all-stars.
Recently, I was on the TV show Comic Book Men that aired on the AMC network. So after I was done with the show, at my appearance, the producers said, Arlen, as a thank you gift to the staff, would you turn our entire staff into superheroes? So that's what I did. You can see Kevin Smith in the front there. This was, I had nothing to do with these images, but if you've seen the show, it's shot out of Red Bank, New Jersey, out of the comic book store. And there's me with my copy of, my framed copy of Batman #9. This is how they show it in the show. And then I brought my very hard to find Superman painting, but it comes right out of my apartment. And I mean, that's how I treat Superman. That's maybe the first realistic painted Superman ever in the late 70s. Nowadays, painted comic art is all the rage, but this artist, Drew Struzan, was the first to do that, and you can see the kind of place it has in my apartment. Now, I've been known to kind of incorporate Superman, obviously, into my own life. When I got this cape and I customized it, this was me at last fall's New York convention. But again, I take Superman very seriously, and other people do too. Because this image is an aerial view of the crash site of Flight 93 on 9/11. I found out, listening to a radio program, that this man's widow, Louis Nackey, said that he was one of the ones that fought back in 93. I heard the widow say over a radio program that he had a Superman tattoo on his shoulder. And I thought to myself, we will never know what happened on that flight, but I guarantee you, if this guy had a Superman tattoo, I wouldn't be surprised if he led the charge because of the ideals that Superman represented. So, in February of '02, the Society of Illustrators in New York City was having a memorial exhibition, and they wanted participants. So I contacted his widow, and I decided to turn Louis Nackey into Superman. And his widow came, and I delivered a speech. When you go to my YouTube channel, my speech is on there. What was interesting, when I was working on this image, I went to a comic convention much like this, and I found an old comic from 1966, a Superman comic. And in it was a letter from a kid from England. And he wrote, or I wrote, Louis Nackey was one of the courageous passengers of United Flight 93 who fought the hijackers and by nobly sacrificing his and their lives, saved the lives of countless others. Did Nackey's love of Superman, emblemized by the Superman tattoo on his shoulder, help him act superheroically that fateful day? Perhaps an answer can be found in a letter to the editor of Superman by Tony Papard from England, who wrote, and this is what blew me away when I was working on this image, Superman is not just a fictional comic character, he is a symbol of all that is good in America. And it's in that spirit, the same year, I taught a lecture series at the CUNY Graduate Center in New York City, based on ideas that I've had for years about comic book art in the 1960s that I grew up in, how it related to what was happening in the decade. And that became the basis for my book, The Silver Age of Comic Book Art, which I have downstairs if you come and see me afterwards, in which I go back to the earliest ideas I loved as a kid. Remember that Marvel Mania logo? There it is on the cover. When you open up the book, the first image you see is an image by Gil Kane of the atom looking up to science and technology. This is where America was in the early 60s. Forward-thinking, positive, the Kennedy years. Then you turn the page, and that image is ghosted, and we jump to 1972 to a hyper-realistic Neil Adams image based on the real-life protesters of the SST in Seattle in 1972, who banned the plane through their efforts because of the pollution it was making. So in the comic, Neil Adams and the writer Denny O'Neil created this Christ-like character, but to me, it also represents the death of the 60s. It's the exact opposite of that image. So my book, The Silver Age of Comic Book Art, is through the work of these incredible artists of the 1960s, many of whom are still alive and working today. I call them, in an ad I put together, they're the greatest generation, which was a pun on the Tom Brokaw book. But this was copied to come to the lecture series based on the book. So for instance, when I talk about Jack Kirby, he was the co-creator with Stan Lee of the whole Marvel Universe characters. This was an image from one of his great comic covers, but in my book, I slightly redesigned it, and I put in there kind of a self-portrait that Kirby drew, because he saw himself mostly as the Thing. Now, if you know anything about Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, there's been a big debate and legal battle these past couple of years where Stan Lee believes he is the sole creator as the writer who came up with the verbal ideas. I tend, as an artist, to take a little bit more of the artist side in comics, and I developed a whole theory about this that I lectured on last summer at the San Diego Comic Convention. that I'm calling the auteur theory of comics, which basically says that the very act of telling a story in comic book form, when you work with a writer in any type, the artist is the de facto co-creator and therefore co-author. This is a famous page of Jack Kirby's The Silver Surfer trilogy, where he basically told the story, and you can see his margin notes for Stan Lee. So if you come to the San Diego convention this summer, I'll be doing this lecture and presentation out there, and then later this fall I'll be doing a version of it in print for the magazine The Jack Kirby Collector. Of course, there had to be a chapter on Neal Adams in my book. He also, in addition to really creating the model for the modern mysterious Batman, it was the Neal Adams X-Men in 1969 that really created the foundation for the new X-Men that are Marvel's most popular series today. So in many ways, Neal Adams is the postmodern recreator of the two biggest superhero franchises in comic books today. If you look at the sketch and the finish there in the bottom right, 3 years before my book, I did a Neal Adams sketchbook in which I interviewed Neal, and that's his words to the right of those images. And so I tried to design a sketchbook that was more than just showing a bunch of sketches, but it actually is a primer on the art of sketching itself. I have a copy of the hardcover downstairs, but the book is still in print, and you can find it. That's the original hardcover. DC Comics wanted too much money to put Batman on the cover because the title page is really what I wanted the cover to be. And again, that's actual size. And these are images that Neal did in one issue in 1969 that literally changed Batman overnight. Of course, Carmine Infantino, the artist of The Flash, I was lucky enough to be influenced by him before Neal Adams. So in my chapter on Infantino, I try to show how in his creation of the graphic design of The Flash, you have the delineation of speed and motion that have become graphic visual standards that no other artist to this date has ever gotten down like Infantino got down. To the point where when I do my lectures, I will have the, I'll say, nerve to compare a comic book image about two-dimensional motion with one of the most famous two-dimensional depictions of motion, Duchamp's Nude Descending a Staircase. I have no problem comparing the famous Japanese wave that is a standard in classical art to the way Infantino portrayed motion and a wave that I, as an American pop artist, find just as beautiful. When you look at the speed that Infantino put into just this panel of an incidental car, when I had to do a car illustration for Alfa Romeo, I based it on that Infantino image. I did a vertical poster for Alfa Romeo, and I wanted to have the Mercury Speed character in a duel against the Alfa Romeo itself. What did I base it on? The classic First Time Superman Meets the Flash, also penciled by Carmine Infantino. So there's my pencil sketch, and there's the finished color. Again, Alfa Romeo, hello, Action Comics. I recently took another classic Action Comics image that, because of Paul Levitz's new book, printed the black and white original art, which I was able to then recolor and redesign for both a lecture and a print piece I'm doing as what I call a requiem for Mort Weisinger, the editor of Superman, for the baby boom generation. For 30 years, as you can see in this image that I did for the New York Comic Convention when I gave it as a lecture, his stories and comics he produced were loved by a generation, but professionally he was disliked and even hated. I had to find a way to do, is there a requiem for a guy like Mort Weisinger? So this is the cover for the trade magazine coming out in August of Alter Ego, in which I took my lecture, where I took the words of Weisinger and the images of Kurt Swan, and I delivered what I call a requiem for Weisinger. So here's a sneak preview. These are double-page spreads of what you're going to be seeing in Alter Ego. All the words are the words of Mort Weisinger himself. The images are all Kurt Swan's, and the typeset type, believe it or not, I met the son of Mort Weisinger, who's in his early 60s and a child psychiatrist, and I interviewed him about his father. So it gives you two different perspectives. So for instance, Hank would say, The Superman mythology was more than co-created. It was really developed by my father. But he had to fight DC to get his credit. He used to say, Donenfeld was not my boss. Leibowitz was not my boss. Those were the two owners of DC Comics. I have 60 million bosses, the readers. Here's another double-page spread where, again, it looks like a comic book illustrated by Curt Swan, but it's really not. It's actually a documentary, in Mort's own words, about what he tried to do with Superman. And look at the image I used there at the end. He's immortal. He's invulnerable. Even bad scripts can't hurt him. So again, when I do my comic history, I'm still doing it like a comic book with words and pictures. Of course, I return to that original image of the classic Superman silver motif. And in my book, The Silver Age, it's the very last page of my book where I pay homage to all the statues of Curt Swan. But the real last page of my book is a one-page autobiography where I try to talk about how I came to really be who I am. And you can see in the top half, I have my camp picture, the picture I sent to my mom. My idea of Mount Rushmore, you know, the Republicans want to put Reagan on Mount Rushmore. This should be Mount Rushmore, at least the Mount Rushmore adjunct. The bottom of the page, I talk about how when I was in school, when I was your age, you, right there, I gave lectures about what? You had to do an information report. Thanks to Jim Steranko in the History of Comics, I gave a lecture about the lawsuit between Superman and Captain Marvel, 1972. I'm 14 years old. Extra credit for visual aids. And the final panel, that's back when I had my goatee, I say comic art inspired my life and career, though it's often treated like a stepchild by mainstream culture. The debt I owe, one of the greatest American art forms of the 20th century, can never fully be repaid. But then the real ending was when a friend gave me a quote by Albert Camus, the great existentialist writer. And my friend said, Arlen, this quote is you. And it says, a man's work is nothing but the slow trek to rediscover through the detours of art those two or three great and simple images in whose presence his heart first opened. Thank you very much. Not bad, I'm only 10 minutes off, I think. Do we have time for a little Q&A before you kick us out of here? Okay, well, like I said, I'll